You know how in certain grocery stores they don't have bags unless you buy them? And how sometimes in your infinite wisdom you decide not to buy a bag thinking you can handle all your canned goods and fresh fruit, only to drop all of it when you're juggling your keys trying to open your apartment door? Yep, that's what trying to adapt the lore of Dune is like. You only got two hands. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Let's Talk, the series where we always spend the 10 cents. This is your friendly neighborhood Birdman, and today we're talking Dune. So Dune is the 100th attempt at an adaptation of Frank Herbert's incredibly lore-rich novel, Dune, which isn't entirely accurate, but more on that later. It tells the story of Paul Atreides, the son of a duke in the far future. In this future, there exists a rare and enormously valuable substance called the spice that only exists on a planet known as Arrakis, aka Dune, a barely hospitable planet that is inhabited by gigantic killer worms. Paul and his father are caught up in a conspiracy to destroy House Atreides by the jealous emperor and are sent to Arrakis under the false pretense that they are to govern it. Unbeknownst to them, the emperor has secretly hatched a plot with the brutal House Harkonnen to eradicate them. I have seen this film 3 times now. The first time I saw it, I came away whelmed. Not underwhelmed or overwhelmed, just whelmed. The story of Dune is not exactly for the impatient, especially because there is an incredible amount of information that the film has to get across to those that are unfamiliar with the source material. And here lies my first issue with my initial viewing. For clarity's sake, I am familiar with the source material, having read Dune back in junior high school and again in college, and having watched the terrible 1984 film adaptation of the book. So believe me when I say, I knew what should be going on. However, I couldn't hear what was going on. The sound mixing in this film is absolutely dreadful. The sound effects and music completely drowned out important pieces of dialogue, which is a killer for people who are watching this series for the first time. The amount of information that is present in this series is a little much for those that are initiated, so imagine trying to win over people that don't know what's going on in this universe when they can't hear 40% of the film's dialogue. This is not an exaggeration, by the way. Nearly half the dialogue is either drowned out by incredibly loud sound effects and music, or is whispered in a hushed voice that is difficult to discern. Mind you, my first viewing of this film was in a theater with a killer sound system, so the lush and outstanding soundtrack of this film flooded and overwhelmed my senses. The problem is that the filmmakers loved their soundtrack so much that they decided it was better to hear that than important pieces of dialogue. So my solution was simple. I went back to my hotel and decided to simply fire up the film on my laptop, turn the subtitles on, and watch the film again to see what I had missed. And this was a great idea because this film is really darn good. Of course, I already liked Dune's story as it is one of the granddaddies of sci-fi, but man, Denis just doesn't miss. The acting, the scale, the visuals are all top tier stuff. While I don't think this film is as good as Denis' Blade Runner 2049, this has got to be up there in terms of his best work. The visuals in this film alone are enough to warrant the purchase of a ticket, but this soundtrack is otherworldly. Aside from a satisfying story, this is what I love most about science fantasy, the world building. Having a gorgeous and lived-in world being complemented by auditory sex is everything. If you have a sci-fi world that you want to come alive, you want Denis at the helm. I mean, it's incredible to me that he hasn't been offered the opportunity to create a Star Wars film. Think about it, Star Wars with the visuals, soundtrack, and themes of a Denis Villeneuve film. A man can only dream. The actors all do a great job, with the weak link being Jason Momoa and the strongest link being Rebecca Ferguson. Jason doesn't really seem to fit in with the rest of the cast, and while I hesitate to call him miscast, I did find the juxtaposition with the rest of the cast rather jarring. Everyone else seems to have understood the assignment, that this is an epic space opera where politics, witch-breeding cults, and drama are the currency of the realm, and Jason is a random dude bro. I like the guy, but his inclusion just kinda seemed random. Oscar Isaac, Rebecca Ferguson, and Josh Brolin put on an acting clinic, even though I found Brolin to be slightly underused. His character just kinda disappears, and that has a lot to do with how this movie ends. Stellan Skarsgard is also strong in this film, but he's comically underused, which is a weird thing to say about a 2-hour and 36-minute film. On that same note, Zendaya is not in this movie either. Don't be fooled by the trailers, people. She has like 4 total scenes, and 3 of them are dream sequences that don't last 15 seconds. That said, the major problems I have with this film, aside from the audio mixing, are twofold: the narrative direction and the marketing, which are interrelated. Be warned, this is not a complete story, nor does this film end satisfactorily. The film's name itself is misleading. From the outside, it seems to be adapting the first book, which is also titled Dune. However, this film is akin to Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in that it has split the book into multiple parts. In fact, this film is actually called Dune Part 1, which is something the marketing hides. This is unfair to the audience member who has no idea that this film isn't telling a complete story. That's the problem with the marketing, that it's sold as Dune and not Dune Part 1, because you're sitting there for more than 2.5 hours and nothing that gets set up is paid off. What's worse is that the second part hasn't even been filmed yet, meaning the plan was to bank on enough people coming in to watch this that the rest of the story gets greenlit. That's an awful way of curating a story, because there was no guarantee that this story would have been concluded. I mean, there was the real threat of COVID mandates shutting down theaters again, meaning relying on box office numbers was incredibly risky. This is especially egregious when you realize this was the fate of Denis' Blade Runner 2049, which is a technically all-around better film, but never got the box office to justify a sequel. We live in a timeline where one of the biggest movies of all time is 3 hours long. In that same timeline, we had an enormous fan-driven push to release a director's cut that was over 4 hours long. This movie has no excuse not to finish its story. If a movie is as mentally and visually stimulating as this film is, I would sit there for 4 hours with a smile on my face as I drown in the spectacle, awash in this fascinating universe. I hate that this film ends where it does. This is why I came away whelmed. I felt as if a luxurious rug had been ripped from under my feet. Coupled with the fact that I only got about half the dialogue, I find it extremely difficult to recommend this movie for theater viewing, which seems contradictory because experiencing the visuals and sounds in a theater system seems like the way to go. So I'm in a love-hate relationship with this movie. I want people to go support projects like these because I want more movies like these being made. It's an absolute crime against cinema that Blade Runner 2049 didn't make bank at the box office, but I can't honestly tell people to go watch half a story that they may or may not even be able to hear. So, I'm going to give this movie a B. Until the ending, I was fully engrossed in what was going on, but ending the way it does and the audio issues are just too much for me to honestly give it a higher score. And believe me, I wanted to give it a higher score, but how can you when the movie is essentially a 2.5-hour pilot that ends before its second act? I guess I'll be the one to die on that sword. This has been your friendly neighborhood Birdman, and I'll see you in the next one.